a real pleasure to be here tonight, and I would just like to draw your attention to the sign. I know we've asked you just a few minutes ago if you could turn off your cell phones. We'd like you to put them into airplane mode rather than vibration mode, because there are a number of people in the audience who are electrically hypersensitive, and even low levels of radiation adversely affect them. So please do that. Either turn your phone off completely so you can't receive the call, or please put it into airplane mode so that they can continue to stay here with us. I'm going to be talking about something that's really near and dear to my heart. I'm very concerned with what is happening in the school system, and our desire to make school a very positive experience for students and to make certain that we're progressive. We've moved to internet access, which I think is absolutely wonderful. The internet has opened up an entirely new world of education. I use it more and more in my research, and the internet is beginning to have more and more reliable information on it. However, exposing children to wireless routers as the way to access the internet is a very, very serious mistake. And unfortunately, school boards across the world, but mostly in North America, are moving in that direction. School boards in Europe have done this earlier than we have, and a number of them are pulling the Wi-Fi out because they recognize there are harmful effects of exposure to this radiation. So we can learn from them, or we can make very costly mistakes by putting it in and then having to pull it out later on. But in the meantime, students and teachers are going to become ill, and that's what I'm most concerned about. The talk that I'm going to give is based on a YouTube video that I made a few years ago. It's available on my website. So for those of you who would like to see parts of it again, you can get it there. I've updated it quite a bit, so there's new information in there, so the other one's slightly dated. And the question I'm asking is, Wi-Fi in schools, is it safe? And the answers will either be true or false to the questions that I'm asking. Most parents would object to having antennas placed on a schoolyard because they recognize that this radiation it's not good to be exposed to it. So if we're not prepared to allow cell phone antennas to be placed on school property, why are we so willing to allow it to be placed inside schools? The cell phone antenna emits microwave radiation just as the wireless router does in a classroom. So we're actually taking antennas from outside that we wouldn't be tolerating outside, and we're putting it inside the classroom, usually a few feet away from a teacher's head. Now, most of us are familiar with microwave ovens. That's probably the most common microwave technology that we're all familiar with. And there's a number of similarities and differences between microwave ovens and Wi-Fi routers. And I'm going to go over them very quickly. First of all, they use the same frequency, and that frequency has the same wavelength. It's about 12 centimeters long. This is the frequency where you have optimal heating of water. 2.45 gigahertz is where you have optimal heating of water. That's why we have microwave ovens to heat food. Now that's the similarity. The differences are that the microwave router in your student's classroom, or indeed the one perhaps in your home, is going to have a much lower intensity than your microwave oven. And that's very positive because intensity is critical for biological effects. However, your Wi-Fi microwaves, they're not contained. They're actually out in the air. Within the microwave oven, we've got screening on the front of that door to minimize that microwave from getting into your environment. The waveform is different. In a microwave oven, it's continuous wave. With Wi-Fi, it's pulsed. And pulsed radiation is actually more biologically active and more harmful. And I won't go into that later on. The Wi-Fi router, unlike your microwave oven, is on all the time. So whether you have students using microwaves, uploading or downloading information from the internet, if you have a Wi-Fi router at home, it's on all the time. It's waiting to be connecting you to the internet. And because of these three things, we're very concerned about constant low-level exposure of children and teachers. Now I'm going to give you a short microwave cooking lesson that I think many of you will recognize as incredibly important. If you take a potato and you put it into a microwave oven on 100% power, you can have a baked potato within about 6 minutes. If we reduce the power on the microwave to 50% intensity, it will take you twice as long to cook that potato. And you can try it. I've actually tried it to make sure it works, and it works. So you up your time to 12 minutes. This is called the time-weighted exposure. The other thing about microwaves that we have to recognize is duration of exposure is absolutely critical. It's not just how intense the power is, it's how long you're going to expose something to the radiation. Now let's replace the potatoes with children, school children, and your microwave oven with a Wi-Fi router in a classroom, and look at the same thing, the time-weighted average. Kids are in school approximately 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, approximately 40 weeks a year. And if you calculate that out, they're exposed for 1,200 hours each year to low levels of microwave radiation in that classroom. Over a 10-year period, that's 12,000 hours. And I'm going to put this 12,000 hours into perspective for you. A few years ago, in 2010, there was a report that came out from the Interphone study. This is one of the largest studies looking at the effects of cell phones on brain tumors. And what they found is that adults who were exposed over a 10-year period to 1,640 hours had a 40% increase in developing a glioma. These are adults. This is over a 10-year period. So very, 1,640 hours is not a long time.
Sorry, just to not alarm, can you clarify that that's relative risk? Because that's scary for some people who don't have a science background.
Okay, it's an increase in risk. It's a 40% increase in risk. And actually, if you look at that study, they say 40% in the main report. They have two appendices. They raise that to 80% when they do the statistics properly. And a few years later, another report came out in Canada, and there was with Canada included in the study, and it came out to 230% increase. So I'm actually quoting the lowest increased risk of developing a brain tumor. There's a 40% increase for people who use it for that long. And you can have questions afterwards and comments. Okay, so we're talking about 1,640 hours over a 10-year period. Kids are exposed to 12,000 hours over a 10-year period. And we're told that this is safe. 7 times longer exposure. Now you say, but hold on, you use a cell phone, you hold it right up to your head, you're going to have higher levels of radiation. What do kids do? They have laptop computers, they have it right against their body, on their lap. So in my mind, to say that this is perfectly safe is based on no science whatsoever. So true or false? Wi-Fi in schools is safe. My answer to that is definitely false. There's no question in my mind. Let's take a look at the electromagnetic spectrum, because someone in the audience says some of you might not have a good science background, and so I really want you to be able to understand what I'm saying. You don't have to agree with me, but it's really important that we're talking the same language. So here we have the electromagnetic spectrum, and it's ordered according to frequency. So as we go up the spectrum, there's higher and higher frequencies, shorter and shorter wavelengths. And scientists have given different names to the spectrum, and these different groups within the spectrum have similar properties. So we have one portion called extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields. We have another part called radio frequency radiation, and you can see that microwaves and radar are within the radio frequency band. So if we're talking about microwaves, we're also talking about radio frequency. If we're talking about radio frequency, we may not be talking about microwaves. So that's how you differentiate the two. Now, 2.4 gigahertz falls right within this path that is actually microwaves, and it falls within the radar and the spectrum as well. And then we have a part of the spectrum near the top that's called ionizing radiation. And we know ionizing radiation is harmful. It has a lot of energy. It can directly break chemical bonds. But according to the World Health Organization and the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the other two parts of the spectrum that I've labeled here, radio frequency and extremely low frequency, are possibly carcinogenic. That's how they've been labeled. Now, how do you understand how microwave radiation works? Well, it turns out light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And a lot of the things that are characteristic of light are also characteristic of microwaves. So we know that light can penetrate through windows. You can see the sun coming in out from outside. If you have a mirror, you can reflect it. You can focus light. You can get it to be very, very focused and very, very hot. And you can also absorb light depending on the amount of color that you have. So dark objects will absorb more light energy and they'll become warm. It turns out the microwaves behave the same way. So you can actually generate microwaves. They will actually penetrate into buildings. That's why we can use our cell phones inside buildings, even though the antenna is external to the building. If you have metal objects, they actually reflect or re-radiate microwave radiation. And if you have water, it absorbs this form of radiation. And that's why you can take that potato I talked about earlier, because it's wet, you can put it in the microwave oven, and the water molecules are going to vibrate until they actually heat the potato. But if you take dry rice, nothing's going to happen. So, true or false? Levels of microwave radiation in a room are uniform. False. If you have a filing cabinet between you and the source, that will actually shield you from the radiation. But if you're sitting in front of the filing cabinet and you're between the filing cabinet and the radiation, it's going to increase your exposure. So if you take a measurement in the middle of the room versus here in this particular drawing or closer to the router, you're going to have very, very different levels of radiation that you will be exposed to. We know that metal can reflect or block or focus. So if you have metal objects either on or in your body, that's going to affect the way microwaves interact with your body. So if you have a young student who has metal braces and they happen to stand near one of these transmitting Wi-Fi routers, that radiation is going to bounce off the teeth and it's going to bounce around a little bit in the head until it eventually dissipates as heat. True or false? Our exposure to microwaves is increasing exponentially. True. This is a map of the United States showing the different areas that used Wi-Fi, wireless internet access, back in 2002. This is what it looked like in 2004, 2008, 2012. So we've gone from this to this within a 10-year period. Our levels of microwave radiation are slowly creeping up. And so we're all exposed. It's hard to go to a location that doesn't have wireless technology. And I like to use the flood analogy because the levels are increasing. So if the levels are really, really low, the background levels of microwave radiation are incredibly low. Most of it is filtered out by our atmosphere. And the microwave radiation that does come from foreign objects has to be picked up by really large radio frequency antennas. And the levels come up a little bit, and initially there's no problem. And then eventually some people in our society cannot tolerate the levels that they're exposed to. For whatever reason, they're a lot more sensitive. And I call these people electrically hypersensitive, the ones that are adversely reacting to the radiation. And this is what's coming soon, because our government is telling us that this radiation is perfectly safe as long as it's within guidelines. And the guidelines in Canada are very, very high. True or false? Health Canada's Safety Code 6 guidelines protect the public. This is the intensity of the microwave radiation. It's measured as power density. And here you can see all the different guidelines we have in different countries. They range orders of magnitude. This is actually a log scale. So each time we move up one notch, it's 10 times higher. It's not a linear scale. I've done a lot of work in chemical toxicology, and if we're looking at the toxicity of something like mercury or lead or even nitrate in drinking water, and you look at guidelines around the world, they are incredibly close, incredibly close. 5 orders of magnitude for any chemical is unheard of. So why do we have 5 orders of magnitude for this kind of radiation? And this is where Canada and the United States fall, right at the top end of that scale. This is where Russia, Switzerland, China, a lot of the Eastern European countries fall. They have much stricter guidelines. And indeed, in 1999, Toronto Board of Health recommended that we lower our guidelines from 1,000 down to the same guidelines, down to 10, which is the guidelines in Russia. And in red, we see what the effects are. And I'm not going to go over the effects in this graph, but I'm going to share some effects with you in a few minutes. So it's false. Our guidelines do not protect public health. They will protect you against heating, because that's what they're based on. I mean, this is totally unacceptable. Health Canada was given this information, and they did nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. They didn't investigate. Indeed, Beth Peterson, who was then the Director General of the Radiation Branch of Health Canada, said it could be 10 or 100 times higher, and we wouldn't be concerned, because our guidelines are so protective. The Czech guidelines are 0.004 rather than 1, using these units. And we did a study looking at heart rate variability that I'll share with you in a few minutes, and we exposed adults at 3.003. They had heart arrhythmia and tachycardia. And according to this study, 43% of the classrooms had levels higher than the study we did showing tachycardia or rapid heart rate. Now, there are a number of people who are beginning to measure Wi-Fi in schools, and indeed some schools are measuring it. And the Pine Ridge District School Board, which is the one near Peterborough that I'm part of or close to, they have posted some of their measurements. And so we have readings here for Toronto General Hospital, Starbucks, Trent University, 100 meters from a cell tower in Peterborough, hospital for sick kids, and these are the average levels in the classroom with routers. And this is the maximum that the Pine Ridge District measured and listed on their website. Okay. Now, this was in a classroom that had no devices operating. There were no computers running, downloading. This was simply the router in that classroom. Here we have the Toronto Public Health Prudent Avoidance Limit. Health Canada's limit, as I mentioned earlier, is 1,000 on this graph. So you can't, it's up by the ceiling if we were to actually post it. Now let's do another comparison. What are the studies showing of the effects of this level of radiation? Well, in Germany, there was a study showing that 0.38 was associated with cancer for people who live near cell towers. In Austria, electrical hypersensitivity at 0.41, also for people who live near cell towers. And the symptoms they had was headaches, tremors, cold feet and hands, problems concentrating, all statistically significantly higher than neighbors who were not exposed to the radiation. Study in Israel, cancer, 0.58 was associated with an increase in cancer. Sterility in mice at 1. Heart problems, the study we did, at 3. And hormone changes for people who live near cell towers at 6.7. So you can see here that for classrooms that have levels up here, even for classrooms that have very low levels, they're exceeding what cell towers are emitting within about 100 or 200 meters from them. We have exposure increasing exponentially. We have smart meters on our homes. We're going to have smart appliances. There's just so many forms of this radiation. And everyone is hiding behind Health Canada. Health Canada sets the guidelines for us. All the wireless providers, the different provincial health authorities, regional health units, they all have to defer to Health Canada, the Public Utility Commission, and now schools. So when you talk to anyone in a school environment, whether it's a superintendent or some trustee, they say that Health Canada says this is safe. Health Canada is wrong that this is safe. There's just too much evidence out there, and I know they're actually reviewing their guidelines. And if you look at the people they've selected to review those guidelines, many of them have worked with the cell phone industry or are working with technology and don't want the guidelines lower. So it's a big farce as to what's happening right now with Health Canada and guidelines. Now, what are the effects of 2.4 gigahertz exposure? True or false? Long-term low-level microwave exposure causes cancer in rats.